Good morning, welcome to Early Exchange on SUG News. I am Blessing A.G. This is the place where we talk extensively about business, economy and development so you can make informed decisions and have better exchanges for your business transactions. Straight away, let's have the ball rolling as we go over to the news desk where Ola Oluwawe is waiting to bring you up to speed with current happenings around the globe. Thereafter, we will dive into the matter of today, which centers around legislative processes in Nigeria. Stay tuned and let's have the news from Ola. Good morning, welcome to the morning news update. I am Ola Oluwawe. Let's get to the major developments from all around the world. We start with Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu has expressed his unwavering commitment to making Nigeria a prime destination for business, assuring investors and friends that he would break through any obstacle hindering their path. The president revealed this while meeting with Prakash Hinduja, the chairman and CEO of the Hinduja Group of companies in New Delhi, India. The president also emphasized his determination to transform Nigeria into a highly conducive environment for profitable ventures and delegated the ministers of Trade and Finance to continue discussions and draft mutually satisfactory terms that would fast-track the process. In his response, Prakash Hinduja commended President Tinubu's transformative efforts as the former governor of Lagos, particularly his achievement in converting a coastal erosion crisis into a thriving free trade zone. And a 10-year-old Nigerian schoolboy named Oluwademilade Odumubomi has won the Global Toyota Dream Car Art Contest for 2023 after beating over 780,000 contestants from 90 countries. His artwork, which featured a waste converter concept aimed at assisting African communities in food production and maintaining a clean environment, received or won him a $5,000 prize, a plaque and a certificate, while his school, Corona School Bagada, was awarded $10,000 for producing the winner. And moving on, in response to the Nigeria Labour Congress NLC two-day warning strike, some parts of the country, including Lagos State, Rivers State and Abuja, have experienced partial compliance from workers, while the Lagos State Secretariat continued regular operations. In Abuja, the block housing the Federal Ministry of Education was briefly locked before being reopened for civil servants, with a lower turnout of workers than usual. The strike is in protest against the government's handling of challenges resulting from the fuel subsidy removal. Nigeria's company income tax, CIT, has experienced remarkable growth, surging by 226% to reach 1.53 trillion naira in the second quarter of 2023, from the 469.01 billion naira reported in the first quarter of the same year. This substantial increase in CIT collections is attributed to robust growth in several sectors, notably water supply, sewerage, waste management and remediation activities, which saw a growth rate of 626.52%. Meanwhile, manufacturing, financial and insurance activities and information as well as communication contributed significantly to CIT collections during this period. The Central African Regional Bloc, ECAS, has announced the suspension of Gabon's membership in response to last week's coup. General Brice Oligui Nguema, who led the coup, was sworn in as transitional president following the contested presidential election. While ECAS leaders discussed the suspension, Equatorial Guinea's President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, who has been in power since 1979, expressed concerns about Gabon's impact on regional peace and stability, prompting reflections on other long-serving African leaders and their sensitivity to the word coup. And the African Development Bank, AFDB, has pledged to allocate $25 billion towards Africa's Climate Fund over the next 27 years, as announced by AFDB President Akinwumi Adesina during the African Climate Summit in Kenya. Additional emphasized the bank's commitment to accelerating the transition to cleaner energy sources and climate adaptation efforts across the continent. Additionally, the AFDB is launching a $20 billion initiative to harness solar power and provide electricity to 250 million people in Africa. And Kenya's President Ruto highlighted the vast opportunities arising from climate change during the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, Kenya. He emphasized Africa's potential to add value to critical battery minerals like nickel, lithium, and cobalt, estimating a value increase from $11 billion to $50 billion by 2025 through refining these minerals. Ruto also noted that by considering the entire electric vehicle value chain, including battery packs and components, Africa could tap into a staggering market worth $7 trillion. The summit, attended by numerous African leaders and delegates, aims to address urgent climate change issues and facilitate substantial deals and commitments. Moving on, conservation organization African Parks intends to release 2,000 southern white rhinos into the wild after acquiring the world's largest private captive rhino breeding operation in South Africa. These rhinos, under severe poaching pressure, will be rewilded over the next decade in one of the largest rewilding programs for any species across the continent. The southern white rhino population, classified as near threatened, numbers around 18,000 individuals, and African Parks aim to safeguard and increase their numbers in secure, well-managed areas to combat poaching threats. It is now time to move to the Middle East and other parts of the world. Stay tuned to the morning news update for this information. And welcome back to the morning news update. Once again, I am Olaoluwa Awe. Oil prices surged by more than 1% following Saudi Arabia and Russia's joint announcement of an extension to their voluntary oil supply cuts. The combined reduction of 1.3 million barrels per day (BPD) will continue for another 3 months until December. Brent crude futures for November rose 1.4% to $90.21 per barrel, surpassing $90 for the first time since November the previous year. And moving on now, let's get to Cuba. Cuba's foreign ministry has revealed the discovery of a human trafficking ring recruiting Cubans to fight for Russia in the Ukraine war. Cubans living in Russia and even some in Cuba were reportedly incorporated into military forces involved in the conflict. While Cuba is an ally of Russia, it emphasized that it is not part of the Ukraine conflict and vowed to take legal action against those attempting to recruit its citizens. 298 female students in France arrived at school yesterday or Monday wearing abayas, the long Muslim robe banned in schools last week, according to official figures. After dialogues with school staff, most girls agreed to change into different clothing and attend classes, while 67 of them refused compliance were sent home. The French government views this as broad acceptance of the ban, which was challenged legally by a group representing some Muslims. And away from that, a significant rise in Canadian pilots seeking licenses to fly in the United States in year 2022, with 147 Canadian pilots applying compared to 39 in 2021, has raised concerns about deepening shortages in Canada as pilots are drawn to higher wages in the United States. This trend, driven by historic wage increases in the United States amid high travel demand, is worrisome for Canadian regional carriers struggling with staffing shortages. The situation could also impact negotiation between Air Canada and its pilots, with the airline already facing resource pressures due to a shortage of regional pilots. And in the United States, Senate Democrats want to avoid a government shutdown in October by working together on a spending plan with President Joe Biden. They support a budget of $1.59 trillion for the year, while some House Republicans want even lower spending. The Senate aims to find a compromise and avoid a government shutdown, but it may take some time to reach an agreement with the House. China, on the other hand, is preparing to launch a state-backed investment fund aiming to raise around $40 billion for its semiconductor industry, marking the largest of 3 funds launched by the Chinese government, or the China Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, called the Big Fund. The fund's target surpasses previous efforts, which raised 138.7 billion yuan in 2014 and 200 billion yuan in 2019. It is expected to focus on chip manufacturing equipment, aligning with President Xi Jinping's goal to achieve semiconductor self-sufficiency and reduce reliance on foreign technology amid export control measures imposed by the United States. And that's the morning news update. Thank you very much for watching. I am Olaoluwa Awe. Let's get to the rest of Early Exchange.
Thank you, Love, for the news updates. Now, if you follow Early Exchange, you already know that at this time we're about to take a deeper look at some of the news stories. And to do this, we have Idausa Osamanze, Director, Research and Policy, Africa Development Study Center. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Blessing.
Good morning.
And of course, Femi is here.
Glad to be here, as always.
All right.
You look radiant this morning.
I have to be radiant. It's beautiful Wednesday.
Yeah, oh, great.
Okay, let's start on a beautiful note as a young Nigerian has made every Nigerian proud. No wonder I am blushing this morning. No wonder I'm very happy. Now, this is the good news. You heard it from Ola, but we're going to talk more on this. A 10-year-old Nigerian schoolboy named Oluwademilade has won the Global Toyota Dream Car Art Contest for 2023 after beating 780,000 contestants from 90 countries. Now, this is what his artwork featured. It featured a waste converter concept aimed at assisting African communities in food production and maintaining a clean environment. Can you beat that? 780,000 contestants. Those were the people that this 10-year-old boy defeated in the contest from 90 countries. Femi.
If there's any time I'm proud to be a Nigerian, I think today is one. The fact that you have a 10-year-old boy making us proud, not just on the local level, but on the global scene, and then it's something commendable. You see, I find it interesting that if you look at the artwork, the conversion of waste, which is what the advocacy has been, going on for a while. And for a 10-year-old Oluwademilade, in fact, I find the name to be even very, very interesting, and it has crowned us with honor and glory according to his name.
Wow, he's living his name.
So he has lived to his name, and this is an encouragement to young people, and that's a sign to show that we have young talents in Nigeria. If we can create the right environment, if they can be given the right support, yes, they can make us proud. So I'm proud of Oluwademilade.
So, also, taking it from here, this is a concept that a 10-year-old has conceived and drawn out. or puts on paper, artwork, to display that this is a concept I have, not just about waste, but how to produce food and then take care of the environment, make sure it's clean. What should be the follow-up action? Yes, he's been given a prize of $5,000 by the organizers of the contest, but what should the country do in response to this concept?
Well, like Femi said, I am proud anywhere to say it, and without any fear of contradiction, that there is no country on the planet Earth that is brilliant and intelligent as Nigeria. God has blessed us so well with intelligence, and I think what for me is how to actually harness these vast resource, human resource, that God has blessed us with, that has actually been our challenge. Because we don't have scarcity of intelligent people, whether young or old. We have been beating record. And it's on record that, of course, if you go to the American community, Nigerians are the most enlightened community in America. And that speaks to the quality of mind that God had given to us. But creating that eco-friendly environment where, of course, we are able to put this mind together to build a system that works has actually been what it is. But I think what we need to learn from here is that, of course, this child is thinking about his future, is thinking about the environment, and I think the Nigerian government should use Oluwade Milade to drive the conversation around clean environment, around safe environment, and these are things that we would need, and use him, of course, as the face of climate change, face of this sustainability of the environment, and encourage this young boy to continue to think and see how much more we can do to really leverage this thing, that this concept that he has put on paper, that we are actually able to bring it to life, and then we can all see it.
Yeah, I think that is the way to go, because it's not enough to just celebrate what he's done and maybe give him some more money or more awards. Yes, those are good, but what do we do with the concepts that he has developed so that the gains can become widespread, the gains can become something that the food industry in Nigeria will gain from, and also it will tackle the issue of waste in Nigeria. So I think that is the way to go for us. Now, moving on, let's look at matters of taxation, as Nigeria's company income tax, CIT, has experienced remarkable growth, surging by 226% to reach 1.5 trillion naira in the second quarter of this year. And that's a great jump from 469.01 billion naira reported in the first quarter of this same year. Now, manufacturing, financial and insurance activities, information and communication contributed significantly to the CIT collections, where there was also a substantial increase in CIT collections attributed to robust growth in several other sectors, notably water supply, sewerage, waste management, and remediation activities.
Well, we spoke to the first leg of it yesterday when we looked at the value-added tax as it comes. Of course, you see they are almost side by side each other. Now, but I think what is happening here is the fact that CAC and Federal Inland Revenue Service are doing great job. The taskness is widening. Remember recently the CAC has announced that they're going to be delisting as many companies who are not filing their annual returns. And of course, a lot of energy is put in by companies to file in their annual return. What this means for the country is that a number of companies that have been evading tax hitherto are now being captured by the taxness. And this has been the argument here, that rather than multiply taxes, all we really need to do is to broaden the tax base Let many people come into the net, and then we'll have more money. And I think this is what is happening. There are still so many people who are still not paying it, especially in the informal sector. We must find a way to capture this community of people so that we can have a broad base of net. Rather than have multiple net tax systems or taxes, then we will have one that is effective and is generating the necessary revenue that can drive development.
Okay, Femi, is it the time for us to begin to commend the FIRS for this remarkable growth in tax collection?
Yes, I think it's commendable if you look at the figures, because how you understand you're making progress is by the figure. The statistics will tell if you're making progress. If the present statistics has increased, and we have it to have increased by 226%, so that's a sign that they are making progress. One interesting thing you must know is that when this administration came on board, when President Tinubu came on board, he insisted what he called the presidential task force on a committee on tax to look at a critical look at the taxes in Nigeria to see what can be done to harmonize them, because you see businesses in Nigeria, they are paying taxes that are not even being recorded or documented. If you ask an average businessman in Nigeria, the number of taxes the person or the business owner is paying, it's difficult to harmonize. So this committee is coming on board, headed by this scholar, Oyedele, and the rest of them. And I'm impressed, if given the right environment, with what they've done in recent times. I'm quite impressed that it is a matter of time. They are coming up with new tax reforms and all that. So for Federal Inland Revenue to have come up with these kind of statistics at this time, they are highly commendable, and I think Nigeria is on the right path. Having the kind of president now who is doing everything to ensure that the tax net is being widened, to ensure that those who are not paying taxes are paying, and then Nigerians will also enjoy the dividend for paying taxes. Nigerians, they are willing to pay taxes as long as they see the effect, the productivity, what these taxes has been utilized. I will be encouraged as a person, if I'm paying taxes and I discover that the infrastructure around Lagos, around across Nigeria is looking better, that will encourage me to pay them more. And as a business owner, if I'm getting the right business environment, then I'll be encouraged to pay more taxes.
Yes, Femi just touched on something that is very key. He talked about some businesses not even having record of the taxes that they pay. It is not documented. While we commend the FIRS for the good job that they're doing in ensuring that there is a remarkable growth in tax collection, it seems like this system is not replicated at the state and local government level, because we do not even see this kind of record that the FIRS gives from time to time about taxes collected at state level, not to even mention local government level. So how do we replicate the system? So it's not just the FIRS that is doing well, but the Inland Revenue Service at the state and the local government level are also up to date in their game.
Well, I think some states are actually also doing well in that regard. Lagos State, for example, since 1999, when democracy came on board, Lagos had actually been on top of their game in terms of revenue generation, the IGI, and of course the publications are out there. In the last 8 years in Kaduna State too, El-Rufai also came on board. I remember that when he assumed office about 8 years ago, he brought in Omengwe Okaru to really drive that process in Kaduna State. And of course, today we can see the dividend of what El-Rufai had been able to do in Kaduna State, almost coming close to what Lagos is raking in for internally generated revenue. So some states are doing, but you also have to understand that, of course, the spread of industrialization is also not same across states. So there are a lot of states that are just rudimentary, really. They don't have many companies. And so what they're doing, the activities may not be as much at this industrial center like Lagos, like Port Harcourt, where a lot of all these things or processes are put in place. But you take a state like Edo too, of course, they've been able to put in the structures of tax collections. And so there's also improvement in terms of collection of taxes. So many of the states internally revenue generation agencies are also doing their bit to see that they can move in people to really get more taxes from company. But I think for me, what is the most important is that creating that atmosphere where company can actually make good profit. Because if you go to actually see in CAC what is being filed, you will see that it's only a very small fraction of the company that are registered that can actually turn in profit. A lot of people are filing zero profit, and this is not good enough. So, which means if businesses prosper, many states can actually have more revenue, and they can actually also drive the process of development in their respective states.
All right, now let's turn to the Africa Climate Summit ongoing in Nairobi, Kenya. It's going to end today, 6th of September 2023. So Kenya's President Ruto has highlighted the vast opportunities that arise from climate change during the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, while the AFDB, which is the African Development Bank, has pledged to allocate $25 billion towards Africa's climate fund over the next 27 years. Now, the issue is, to what area exactly should this money be channeled to, as we talk about the opportunities that are inherent for Africa as regards climate change? So, also, what should the focus be? Because now the AFDB has made a commitment to allocate $25 billion over a 27 years period. But what should this money be earmarked for regarding climate change?
It's clear from the African Development Bank perspective what this money are meant for. And I think what the conversation has been globally is to see how we can actually move funds to help people focus on technology that rely on renewable sources away from non-renewable sources. What that means is that we're looking at a situation where we have good life, and our children and children yet to be born also will have good life. So we are not living well today and denying our children and our children to come the opportunity of enjoying nature. That's what the word is trying to say, that when you are tapping the resources that are non-renewable, they deplete. And it will come to a time they will no longer be there. Take, for example, you see paper everywhere. Now, paper don't fall from the sky. Paper comes from wood that are cut down. Now, when you fell trees, you do two things. Number one, the circulation of oxygen and carbon dioxide has great effect, and that affects human health. So this is why when you are cutting down trees, what of course the climate conversation is saying is that you must also plant trees. So there are states today, when you cut one tree, you have entitled to plant two. And all these have to be encouraged, and this will cost a lot of resources. Take, for example, lithium. People are taking to make battery from non-renewable sources. So these are the conversations that people are saying. God has given us body of water that we can convert to energy. God has given us sunlight that we can convert to energy. Why do we need to focus on things that will deplete? Even water, of course, is a problem, because if you have to use water to generate energy from time, the water dry up. You see what is happening in Lake Chad today. And the environmental consequence that we are facing as a result of desertification. Now, people say that about 50% of the landmass in the northeast has been taken over by desert. So you can't do any human activity there. And people who have hitherto live in those places are migrating to other places, really creating social chaos and conflict in the area where they are migrating to. So if you have to be able to really address this issue, we must see how we can responsibly use the resources that nature has given to us. And this is what the African Development Bank is looking at, and see how can we invest in renewable sources to generate energy to drive civilization.
You know that when you talk about climate change, there are persons who still doubt the effect, and they ask how much of contribution is Africa making towards the depletion of the environment, towards altering the climate. And so some persons are just kind of have a nonchalant attitude toward this. But Femi, what should be the approach for every African? Now we have the AFDB supporting. We're also having some other organizations supporting funding to address issues of climate change. But as Africans, as a people, as citizens, what should begin to change about our approach or our attitudes towards the climate?
You know, you're aware that a few days ago there was a protest as regards the summit where there was this concern that the interest of Africa is not being protected and the influence of Western countries. So I'm impressed now that AFDB is coming up with this initiative for $25 billion, which for me it's a relief. And now Africans will have sense of belonging. Their voices are being heard. And if I want to believe maybe it's as a result of the protest, now they now see the need to restructure the summit towards the importance and things that are priorities to African countries. And I'm impressed that African leaders now are now speaking up. They are taking advantage of that summit to launch their economic potentials and also see a way to enhance potential across the continent. So the approach to it, now that the pace has been set, is to ensure that we follow it through. This allocation, the way it has to be allocated, it has to be followed to ensure that it justifies the purpose where it's being allocated. You've seen instances where funds are being released, and then in the end, the element of corruption comes in and all that. But I don't expect that to happen this time around. And with this initiative can be followed through, you see that Africa will be better for it. And the right initiative, right attitude to it towards climate change, it's a robust, holistic to it. It's just beyond what government will do. An average African, an average Nigeria, any person in the part of the continent must also own the process, own the concept, own the idea, so that that sense of belonging is there. And everybody contributes their own end to the to improving climate, the climate change in Africa, which is now unless like a global thing.
Yes, I like the fact that Africa is beginning to own the conversation about climate change. You know, yesterday we talked about data localism towards ecological accounting. So this talks about localizing data, generating the data ourselves. You know, when phones are released, sometimes it's more or less that the data comes from foreign countries about things happening here.
Yes, speaking to data, I also feel that one area too we have to actually concentrate, and this for me, and I don't know if this is in the agenda of those who actually protested, is to say that the technology that drives renewable energy is actually from the West also. So when you are saying climate change and we're going to fight climate change, what you have is that you're creating a new market in the West and in Asia. And of course, what that means is that there's still going to be a lot of capital flight from Africa to either Asia or the Western countries. Now, I think one area, of course, ADB really will also need to also put part of this fund into is in the area of research, so that we can begin to also have indigenous technology to deal with these issues. To say whether climate change is real, is real. You don't even need to be a scientist to know. If you have grown enough to have lived up to 40 years, you will know that weather has completely changed.
But some people argue that the impact is nothing to worry about at this stage.
It's so much to worry about.
If
you're looking at, for example, in a rainforest zone like Lagos, and you're having temperature during rainy season at 31%, it should give you some cause for worry. So we know that it is real. There's no doubt about whether climate change is happening or whether we are contributing to it. It's going to be here. But for me, really, what the conversation should be around is that we also profit from it. Seize the opportunity of the climate change, invent technologies that we can also sell to the West and do better than them. We're just talking about Oluwadamilare just now, who had pioneered something, beating 90 countries to win a crown for the country. We can do much more better, setting also the pace for other countries to follow, so that we will benefit from the largesse that will come with climate change.
Yes, homegrown solutions to home problems. I think that is the way to go, so that at the end of the day, instead of taking the money outside to fight the issues here, we spread the money in the economy. At the end of the day, the environment is better and the economy is better for it at the end of the day. Okay, before we go, let's quickly take a look at the Russia-Ukraine war. It seems like as the day goes by, more countries are being implicated in the Russia and Ukraine war because Cuba's foreign ministry has revealed the discovery of a human trafficking ring recruiting Cubans to fight for Russia in the Ukraine war. Now, Cubans living in Russia and even some in Cuba were reportedly incorporated into the military forces involved in the conflict. So whether this implication is intentional or it's accidental, but somehow it just seems to be an implication of other countries in the fight.
Oh, yeah, but we've said here before that what the Russian-Ukraine war portend for the world is that we are moving back again to a bipolar world. People are looking in and strategizing, making new friends and see how to come into things. And see, when you see Cuba responding like this, it's also very careful because it's at the backyard of the international policeman of the whole world. And to be sure that you are not our enemy's enemy, because a friend of my enemy is my enemy. So this is a real issue. So they need really to speak out. The real truth of the matter is that Russia needs manpower. They need people who have to drive. We had some cases recently where some people who had to come from Africa, even Congo, to go to Russia, even in this same war. There was some time when this war started new, some Nigerians were queuing up at the embassy of Kiev in Nigeria to go to fight on the side of Ukraine. So these are issues. Country will always align. And of course, when you're making an alignment, you have to also be strategic about it. And not just aligning for aligning's sake, you are aligning for the economic benefit that comes to you. Because like they always say in international relations, foreign policy is an extension of your domestic policy. So when you are interacting in the whole world, what are you looking out for? You are looking out for what is going to come to you, what you are going to benefit. And if the position you are taking will be of adverse effect to your locals, then of course it's not a foreign policy option that a country will consider.
Okay, talking about things that could be of adverse effects to the locals. We understand that the reason why we have the legislature is for them to make bills that will not be of adverse effects to the constituents that they represent. So this is what we're looking at after this break as we talk about legislative processes. Just stay tuned to Early Exchange. Many thanks for being there. It's the early exchange on Sook News. Now we will be looking at legislative process in Nigeria. This involves a lot of stages. There are different stages and procedures before a bill becomes a law. Now, Dr. Idahosa, we do hear a lot of times when we watch sit-ins at or proceedings at the Senate or the House of Representatives. We hear first reading, a bill is killed, first reading, second reading, and we even hear third reading. So what does all of this mean? But before we begin to talk at the different stages, before a bill is composed by a legislator and then brought to the House, what should inform a bill? What should inform the composition of a bill, ideally?
Well, I think the construction or design of the presidential system of government, as we practice in Nigeria, made provision for 3 tiers of government. You have the executive, you have the legislature, and you also have the judiciary. Now, the whole idea around this is that, of course, one makes the law, one executes it, and when there are lacunas or issues that has to do with confusion in terms of understanding, the other arm either interpret or adjudicate in the process. Now, coming to the legislature, constitutionally, they're empowered, especially by the Constitutional Federal Republic of Nigeria, as the second arm of government, to make laws for the good governance of the country. So laws are made to see how countries are run very well. And apart from making law, of course, you also know that the legislature, they are also the arm of government that also to check, they call it principle of check and balances, that of course the laws that are made are executed in line and in the spirit of those who initiate those laws. And so most of the time, the law does not just have to come from the legislature themselves alone. The executive can initiate a bill. And if you see in terms of your operation, and things are not working because there are some extant laws in the land that is making it not to work, or there are no provision, clear provisions of law or constitution in that particular area, the executive can initiate a bill. Even private individuals can initiate bills and send them to the House. The whole idea is to ensure that we have orderliness in society, and then, of course, we are all governed appropriately. So whether the bill is coming from outside or it's being initiated by a member of the House, the whole idea and essence is for the good governance of the state.
I would like you to talk to us. You know, there's this perception that the legislative arm of government, as far as Nigeria is concerned, is turning into a rubber stamp, you know, compared to the relationship with the executive. I would like to have your take in respect to how well the legislative arm of government in Nigeria has lived up to its expectation and its statutory functions.
Well, I think it's good you call it perception. And of course, you know, perception is always no reality. You see, one of the things that we tend to take for granted in this part of the world is that until people are fighting, they are not doing something. And I think this is the position that a whole lot of people have taken. And so when you see that, of course, the lawmakers and the executive, they are not at loggerhead, you think that nothing is happening, they are just rubber stamping. This is not really the view, because if you go closely to the workings of the legislature in Nigeria, you see that there is a whole serious level of negotiation that is ongoing behind the cameras to agree on the process. So this is the issue. And for example, one of the law aspects of the legislature, which is the appropriation bill, for example, that make provisions for the funding and the financing of government operations. You see, once this process starts, you see the lawmakers are also reaching out to the executive arms. And here you can find real serious challenge. Now, when you have a house, for example, in Nigeria, where of course the ruling party is also a majority, You don't expect them to be fighting themselves. Because they are running on a manifesto. They are running on a common understanding. They are same party members. What use will it be that they come to the Senate or the House of Rep and all they are doing is to ensure that the executive do not succeed? And I don't really think that is a function of the lawmaker. The real function of the lawmaker is to see that what the executive they are doing, they are in line with the provisions of the constitutions and all the other acts that have been passed into law that govern the state. But you see, many of the people who raise this concern about rubber stamping can actually not point to any area where there's a breach or infraction in the constitutional process. So this is the way we see things, that until people start and come out and fighting in the public, we don't see them to be working. But I don't think that's how the legislature should work. What their own work is to see, and this is why you see they have the function of oversight, for example, and to see that, look, the laws are written in the book and everybody is following the book. And if there is infraction, they have to call people to order. This is the things that people should understand, that there are culture within presidential and democratic practice that people should observe in terms of lawmaking in a country like Nigeria.
Okay, still on the issue of rubber stamping or the legislative perception that the Nigerian legislature is a rubber stamp to the executive. Well, you know that they represent constituencies. And so the expectation of their constituents is that they have quality representation, that the laws that are made from the House, whether at the lower chamber or the upper chamber, which is the Senate, will improve their lives, will benefit them. But what we find is that some laws, the way they scale first reading, second reading, third reading, and even get presidential accent is so speedy compared to some. So what informs the determination of a bill scaling the different stages and becoming a law? Some of them do not go beyond first reading, but some eventually become law. Some bills eventually become law. So what is the criteria for the advancement of a bill?
I think what you should understand in this process is that once a bill is introduced to the House, and every member you introduce, that's what they call the first reading, you introduce the bill, and then of course the Speaker of the House or the Senate President make public reading of that bill and say, of course, this person is proposing this bill, and of course, first time they take it back home and somebody had to assent or second the bill. Then the lawmakers are given the opportunity to look at the bills. And then they read it and somebody comes and say, is there an amendment to the clauses in the bill? Are there clauses that should be removed? They looked at it. Now, what really will speed up the process of bill passing reading is the general consensus in the House. Now, if no interest within the House is touched, you see the bill will speed up. Now, if the interest of a lawmaker is touched by a given legislation, he will raise opposition because the Constitution gives him the power to raise opposition. And when they raise such opposition, then you have to step it down. Now, the person who is writing that bill had to work it. Now, if they don't agree, eventually that bill may not pass the first or second reading stage, to even go to committee stage, where of course a specialized committee had to look at the bill holistically, clause by clause, word by word, to be sure that there is no ambiguity in its construction. Now, all these things are very, very important, because by the time it becomes a law and there are ambiguous clauses within the framing of that legislation, it becomes a challenge for the judiciary to interpret. So what you see there is that consensus is actually what drives it. Now, when you see a bill pass, maybe you see consensus. Because, of course, the rule also says that even when there's going to be opposition, they can also subject it to vote. And if majority of the members of the House believe in the spirit of that bill, it is easily passed. But if they don't believe, then, of course, you see that bill will die natural death.
All right, talking about passing of bill, there's this data released by the Night Assembly that revealed that 874 bills were introduced at the stage of first reading, but only 162 passed through to the third reading. I put this to you. What do you think should be done in a situation where a potential viable bill is not passing through the third reading? You know, for a bill to, be accepted, it has to pass through the first, the second, the third reading. But there's a supposed bill in the interest of the people that is meant to protect the interest of the people. Like you say, it's a game of numbers, it's a game of majority. Do you find it impressive? I want you to speak to these statistics. 874 bills went through first reading, but only 162 passed through the third reading. What does that suggest to you? And what should be done to ensure that potentially viable bills are not being neglected, and especially when it protects the interests of the masses?
You see, people must understand that once a law is made, especially in the arrangement that we run as a federation, the process of its amendment is so cumbersome. And this is a challenge. Now, speaking to some bills passing and some bills not passing, it's the issue of one man's meal is another man's poison. You see, you have a country that is so diverse, a country that is multi-ethnic, and a country that is also not lacking in intelligences. So when you present a bill in the House, the real reason why 360 members are in the House of Rep is that larger clusters of these multi-ethnic nationalities are represented. Now, when you present a bill, and of course, it's coming from the minority, for example, and those in the majority are saying that, of course, their interest will be affected by that legislation, chances are that they are going to oppose that bill. And this is what you see. And that's why I speak to the general consensus. If it is to the well-being of everybody, they will pass. But when these things are not passing, is that you are seeing some specific clause that is either excluding some people, that is cutting off some interest, and these people will say, look, if you do this, of course our interest in the longer run will be hampered. Now, but you see, laws are made for the good of the state. You also see that people make laws and the law become a problem, another problem. Because you're trying to solve one problem, you are putting another legislation that is creating another problem. So, but the person who is thinking it or initiating the bill may be just looking at it one-sided. But like they said today, there's not just two sides to a coin, there's also a third side to the coin. Now, if you don't look at the three sides of the coin, you are likely to see that every law that comes to the National Assembly should pass. And that is why they are there. They are gatekeepers to ensure that whatever that is put into the law is not contrary to the spirit of the union.
You talked about interest, that the House weighs the law, weighs the bill rather, and where it doesn't align with the general interest of those in the House, it doesn't proceed to the next stage. Is the legislative process left entirely to the legislature, to the legislators in the House? At what point does public hearing come in? And what impact will it make when a bill is exposed to public hearing?
Yeah, of course. You see, what happened is that once, of course, they have read it in the House, and the House has agreed, and of course, you find that there is some level of consensus in the House. This bill, after the second reading, is taken to the committee. And now the committee that is in charge, that's why you see, you have several committees. Like the House is being inaugurated now. A lot of committees are being put in place, specialized for special purposes. Now, what this committee do is that they look at the bills in detail and call the stakeholder in that particular area to come and make presentation, public presentation to the committee on what they feel about the legislation. Now, again, it will depend on what the stakeholders will present and how the members of the committee in turn interpret this feedback from the stakeholder that will determine what position they take, and this they will take back to the House in terms of if there are amendments to some certain clauses. They will, of course, make those corrections based on the hearings, and then this is read a third time to the House, and everybody will listen. Now, the real reason it has to be read again to the third House, because you see that some changes had come into the clauses of the particular bill. So the House had to be sure that some clauses that are anti-other interests are not smuggled into the bill. Now, the whole essence of all these things is to ensure transparency, is to ensure that public accountability, that when we are making law, the interest of the majority of the people is put into consideration.
All right, so let's look at the part of it where a bill originates from one chamber. Let's say it originates from the House of Representatives, and then later on it goes through the Senate. So by the time it returns to the originating chamber, and perhaps certain issues have been raised, what are the mechanisms to reconcile those differences? Does it now have to go over another committee stage? What happens at that level when a bill returns to the originating chamber?
Yeah, of course. You see, this is, again, the watchdog role of why we have the two chambers. So that if, of course, there's an error in the lower chamber, of course, the Senate chamber can also look at it holistically, and they make their input into it. But you see, when these things are put in place or they are done, depending on the kind of the legislation that, of course, you are talking about, for example, if it's, for example, an amendment to a constitutional clause that has to do with the Constitution. Now, it's not just even the Senate and the House of Rep. The state legislators have to also vote, because you cannot change the provision in a federal constitution without the component unit of the state also making their input. So there's a constitutional provision that two-thirds majority of the component state of the subnationalities must vote in favor of such an amendment before it comes to Senate. And so in that case, sometimes you have a joint sitting where both houses have to sit down to resolve their differences and say this is the better way to go. And if, of course, general consensus is not seen, such bills, you see, will not fly. And these are other issues. And sometimes, even if the House themselves had agreed to the bills, the executive may see that it also could encumber their operations, and the president can also withhold assent to the bill and suggest reason why he cannot sign the bill. And then he go back again to the House, and they have to review. So you see this back and forth, and this is the real reason why you see some legislations take some longer time to mature than others.
For years now, many Nigerians have been clamoring that lawmaking should be a part-time thing. You know, in Nigeria, it looks like a full-time business where you resume virtually every day or when there's need for sitting or meetings or oversight function. Now, many Nigerians are clamoring for this as a way to reduce cost of governance. What's your take on this?
Well, I think, again, it's neither here nor there. Government is a serious business. It's a serious business. And because it's a serious business, those who are going to do that business must give their full time to it. I don't subscribe to the idea of part-time lawmaking. But I may suggest that maybe for the upper house, especially in the Senate, that you could have people who have done well over time, like it's done in other places, and they have served the country and they have retired, and they are still sound in their mind. maybe they constitute that upper chamber who has enough fund that they may not need to be funded by the federation. Then, of course, but then at that case, you see, they're doing service pro bono to the nation. There's no commitment that is attached to it. You see, the beauty of what we have is not actually the fund that's a problem. You see, when somebody is poor, for example, you see, you can be thinking of a number of things and say, oh, this thing is not necessary, this thing is not necessary. It's because you cannot afford it. And this is why I've always advocated that what we should do as a country is not to think about how to share cake, is to build a bigger cake so that all of us can eat to our fill. So this is the real issue. I don't think that having two structure is anathema to the model of government that we practice. But what is the real issue is that people are seeing that, you see, the legislature, they are taking so much. Now, but look at it if you have to be very objective. If you have a budget of 17 trillion, how much is actually going to the House? When people see 128 billion voted to the National Assembly, they think that every member of the National Assembly is taking the money. They have forgotten that there's bureaucracy in the National Assembly. That the civil servants that are in the National Assembly, they are more than the members of the National Assembly. And they are part of that budget. People forget that the National Assembly members, they have their aides, who, of course, the Constitution also guaranteed that they should have 3 aides, for example, who work for them. And their salary and wages is in that budget. So what you see many Nigerians do is that they just say, oh, you gave 128 billion to one line budget to the National Assembly. They are all sharing the money. And you can divide 128 billion by 360 plus 90 and say this is what each National Assembly member takes. But I don't think that is really the issue. I think it's much more than that. That if you look at it, what of course is gazetted for each member to take, I don't think is what is making us to be talking about cost of governance.
Let me add this to it. You know, with the present reality, economic reality, and when you look at the finance, there's a need for us to cut cost of governance. As far as Senate is concerned, you have about 109 members. House of Representatives, you have 360 members. The reality is here, it's staring at us, looking at the economic situation we are in. And that's why this agitation is being fueled in some quarters. That why do we need to have so much lawmakers rather than having two arms of the legislative system of governance? Why don't we have a unilateral body where we have the upper house like the Senate rather than having two? This is what is fueling this impression and this agitation. What do you think?
You see, for a population of over 200 million, and you have just 469 people representing the entire country, I think that's even under representation in the first place. If we have to look at it by the numbers.
Is it about quality or quantity?
You see, it's not. It's also to look at the measure of job that is to be done and to be done well. Take, for example, oversight, for example. How many agencies do we have? How many ministries do we have? Who is going to oversight what these people are doing to be ensuring that the money that is assigned is used for the purpose, or that they are not frivolous in putting things in the budget? We need hands to do this. And this for me is very important. We must understand that people sit at home and look at it as these guys are doing nothing. But I don't think it is as they feel. Because if you see the process, for example, of scrutinizing a bill, it takes a whole lot. The process of getting to be sure that the budget is read. Have you seen the volume of a budget before? That is coming from all the agencies. That one body cannot read it. It takes human capacity to drive a process. It's also, I say that, oh, because the cost of doing business is important, First Bank should have just 30 staff. How does it work? What we should be speaking to is how do we generate enough revenue to drive the process so that it becomes sustainable. I think that's what the conversation should be around. There are other issues that we must also speak to. which of course I know in the later segment somebody may be speaking to it, is the issue of really ensuring that these people are doing their work and ensuring that the nation is not bleeding. And I think that's what people should speak to more.
Okay, talking about doing the work and ensuring that the nation is not bleeding, you also talked about the budget. When people see the budget voted for the National Assembly, sometimes they wonder, oh, this huge amount of money, how can it be voted for the National Assembly? They forget that there are staff in the National Assembly. But we've also seen at sometimes when these staff protest unpaid salaries and allowances, what happens to the budgets?
Yeah, but you see, like people, you should know, budget is an estimate. It's not an actual. Until the Accountant General of the Federation release the budget, the National Assembly has no control over money. They don't collect money. They are not revenue generating agency. So, see, you have appropriated and said, okay, this year we are going to spend 128 billion for the National Assembly. How this money is released is a different ballgame. Because it's the Accountant General of the Federation that will determine whether there is enough money in the coffers to meet certain exigencies that may occur, whether it's even in the executive or in the legislative chamber. So until they receive the cash, because they are not revenue receiving agency, they will not be able to spend it. And sometimes you also see that you have situations where they have some pressing need. Where, for example, you have things that you have not really accounted for and they are occurring, and you need to move fund. And then, of course, the fund that is released to you for that particular period, you have to vie it to something else. And then this other one, you are saying, no, let it wait. When the next fund comes, we can accommodate it. Now, these are some of the things that we see in terms of how funds are distributed. Yeah, but because, of course, we're talking about a country that is not generating enough, especially when we're talking about in the last how many years where budget is not even performing up to 60%, what that means is that you have not actually realized the volume of money that you have earmarked for yourself to spend for that fiscal year. So these are issues that we need to also understand as citizens, are the challenges that the National Assembly too they face.
All right, the conversation is getting interesting, it's getting more engaging, and we're now being joined by the past Publicity Secretary of NBA Auto Branch, that's Chinelo Olayonju. She's also a chartered mediation and counselor and associate with the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Counselor. Chinelo, glad to have you join us on Early Exchange.
Good morning. It's a pleasure being with you.
All right. I would like you to, we're looking at the process of lawmaking, the procedures involved as far as Nigeria is concerned. As a legal practitioner, I would like you to talk to us, take us through the processes and the procedures involved in lawmaking in Nigeria. And I would also like you to, the second leg to it is to do an assessment of how the National Assembly has been faring in the last 1 or 2 years.
Okay, thanks a lot for this opportunity you've given to me. We all know that in Nigeria, the laws of a nation are the laws that guides how the citizens in the nation behaves. The laws can be in a communal level, within the community, it can be in the state and at the federal level. And before a law can be enacted, it has to pass through some stages. Before it becomes a law, it's known as a bill. And we know the three arms of the government that are in charge. We have the executive arm that is headed by the president. We have the legislative arm, where we have the National Assembly that is made up of the Senate and the Federal House of Reps. Then we have the judiciary that interprets the law. But the purpose of this discussion will be channeling our energy more on the legislative arm. That is the National Assembly, which comprises of 2 chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. They are the ones that turn our bills that are enacted into laws. When a bill is made, the bill can come either through a private bill or a public bill. A private bill is when it has to do with the private citizens, a corporation, anything that has to do with a private individual, the rights and the wrongs of it. Then the public bill has to do the one that has to do, it covers the one that has to do with the general public, the good of the general public. So there are the stages. You have the first reading where the bill is introduced into the House. That's the National Assembly, either through the Senate or through the House of Representatives. The bill can come in through any of these chambers. At the first reading, the clerk of the House introduces the bill through the short title and explains what the bill is meant to cover to members of the chamber, that is either the Senate or the House of Representatives. When this is done, they go on a recess. Another date is now chosen for the second reading of the bill. At the second reading of the bill is also introduced again, either by the clerk of the House, if it's a public bill, or by the person that is applying for the bill to be enacted into law, if it's a private bill. You now go ahead to explain to the House and the chamber involved. You explain to them on what the bill is meant to actualize, the advantages of the bill, the essence of the bill. When this is done, they take a vote on it. If it's accepted, if you have up to 2 or 3 people that accepted the bill, it now goes to the committee stage. But if nobody votes in support of the bill is rejected here and then. That means it doesn't pass the second reading stage. But if it's voted and seconded by some other people, it goes to the committee stage. At the committee stage, a committee will be set up to look into the bill, how the bill is going to affect the citizens or the private individuals or corporations that are in question. When this bill goes to the committee stage, the committee now looks into the bill thoroughly to check if the bill is worthy of going to the next stage or not, to see if there's a way that they can alter it to get a better understanding of the bill, so that the bill will be able to touch more lives than it actually is. That's where you have the place of amendment, alterations. The bill goes through different alterations, different kinds of amendments to bring it into force. When the House is now satisfied, that standing committee, when it's satisfied that the bill has been amended and altered to suit the short title of the bill is now taken back to the General House for the third reading and passage. By then, the clerk of the House will type out what the standing committee, the amendments that the standing committee have done on the bills, and goes back to the third reading for the House. They now vote on the bill because when the clerk of the House types it and publishes in the official gazette, he makes sure that the bill is the published bill is supplied to every single member of the chamber that is hearing the bill. Like I said earlier, the bill could come in through the Senate or it could come in through the House of Representatives. So each single member of the chamber will have a copy of the bill that is meant to be voted into law. At that third reading, they now take a vote. If majority 2/3 of the House agrees to the bill being enacted into law, after the voting, the clerk of the House signs on it, the Senate signs, or the Speaker of the House of Representatives, depends on the chamber that the bill is coming through. If it's coming through the Senate President signs with the clerk of the Senate. If it's coming through the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House of Representatives signs with the clerk of the House. After the signing, they now take it to the President for him to assent. That is after the third reading. That is, the committee the first reading has gone through. It has passed through to second reading. It has gotten to the committee stage where the committee had altered and amended. It gets to the third reading when the members of the chambers have already gone through it and they are satisfied that this is something that is what's being law, and they voted on it. They now push it to the president that will now assent to the bill. When the president signs on it, the bill now becomes law. That is when we now say that a law had been enacted. If the president vetoes on it, after the president has 30 days with which to assent. If he doesn't assent within 30 days, it's sent back to the House. And if the House feels that this bill is worthy to become a law, they vote again on it. And when two-thirds of the House votes in support of that particular bill, it becomes a law, whether the president signs on it or not. Okay. That's how the stages that the bills go through before it becomes laws. So before we see any law that is being proclaimed as a law of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it must have gone through these stages. And when at the point of the third reading, after the third reading stage, and the particular chamber that is going through that particular bill is satisfied with that bill, it sends it to the other chamber. That means if the Senate are the ones looking at the bill, they send it to the House of Rep.
All right, let's assume the bill has scaled all through the process and has gotten to the executive, which is the president, to assent to it, and the president assents to it. Or in a case where the president doesn't assent to the bill, you talked about the House having the constitutional power to veto the bill by two-third vote on the bill, and then it becomes a law. But from experience in Nigeria, looking at the Nigerian legislature, is it a common occurrence for the House to veto a bill where the president refuses to assent to the bill?
It's not really a common occurrence, because most times the House, it's quite unfortunate in Nigeria, most times the House always toes towards the line of the presidency. So in view of that, I would say it's a problem of Nigeria not really having the three arms of the government independent of one another. They are somehow interwoven in Nigeria. So most times you find it difficult to see when the president is not assenting to a bill. You find it difficult getting the House through their own power, to majority power, assenting to that bill.
All right, I would like you to react to this practice. It seems like when it comes to executive bill, it's been given accelerated hearing compared to a bill being sponsored by a member of the Assembly or an honorable in the House. Talk to us in respect to the interference in the responsibility of the executive compared to that of the legislative arm of government. How healthy should this relationship be? And when it comes to checkmating each other, how should they go in order to ensure that good governance is being sustained?
I said something earlier that it's supposed to be that all arms of the government are supposed to be independent of one another, which to me, Nigeria does not really have. Like I said earlier, it's supposed to be like a check and balance system where the executive should be independent on its own, the legislative on its own, the judiciary on its own. But in the Nigerian system, our democracy, to me, I feel we've not really gotten to that point whereby every arm of the government is on its own. That's why we are still having some little glitches in our system, in our legal system, in our laws, in the enactment of laws in Nigeria. Because most times you find out that when you have same people, same political parties, they already have their own goals, their aims, their aspirations. We find that they always want to toe the line of the presidency because they already have a system that they want to protect. So most times it's the checks and balances is not as strong as it ought to be in a true democratic setting, where the executive should have its own autonomy, the legislative its own autonomy. But in Nigeria, they are all interwoven, so it's quite unfortunate that we don't really have a strong check and balance in Nigeria.
So how does party affiliations, public sentiment, influence the progress of bills? And what does that mean at the end of the day for the country?
The party affiliations, it's the parties themselves already have what their own goals, their own aims, their own objectives, even before the president comes into power or sworn in as the president. And as a result of that, most of the bills they want to enact will always go around what the party already has in mind to achieve or to actualize. And due to that, it's mostly difficult most times in Nigeria for the public sentiment to be considered, because they already feel that as they are the ruling party, they already know what is good for the citizens. So whether the citizens are dictating against this or not, they don't really care about what the citizens feel. And this is not good, and I don't see it as a progressive way of doing something in this country, because the citizens are the ones they are trying to govern or better their life. So I feel that it's always the best for the citizens to be listened to, because they are the ones really feeling the law as it is. Because there are some laws that when you enact, you feel it's for the good of the society. But the people you are enacting it for are not really comfortable, or it's not convenient for them, it's not comfortable for them. So I feel that in such things, I think the opinion of the general public should be sought. If they have things like town halls, where the opinions of the public should be sought in the process of enacting bills. Maybe stakeholders in each community, maybe if you are enacting a bill that has to do with, let me say, driving of vehicles, you get stakeholders, you go to different communities, get enlightened people that know what they are really doing in the society, hold a town hall meeting with them, so that they will give in their 2 cents opinion. When the bill is interpreted to them, this is what this bill is aimed to achieve, they give in their 2 cents opinion in the enactment of the bill. It will go a long way to help our bills, when they become laws, to guide the people, to govern the people, and to help the people to obey the rules, because those people are the people that the bills are actually meant to protect. So our checks and balance still has a long way to go, because of the fact that our system of governments, the 3 arms of governments, are not independent of one another. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, talking about bill, making reference to the interests of the people, like you rightly submitted. We had a conversation earlier as regards bills passing through first reading. According to statistics released by the 9th Assembly, about 874 bills were introduced at the first stage of reading. But you discover that the 3rd stage of reading, only 162 bills were passed. Talk to us about the implication of this, like you make reference to that it be protecting the interest of people. What happens in a situation whereby a potentially viable bill meant to protect the interest of people is not being passed through the 3rd reading and eventually lost in transit, if I may put it that way, and eventually that a bill does not see the light of the day?
What are the normal day when such things happen? Assuming it's a public bill that was enacted for the good of the public, like I said earlier, no one will actually know which of the bills passes through if it's not given back to the public, for the public to know that this bill that was enacted passed through the 1st reading, 2nd reading, committee stage, and the 3rd reading or not. When the public knows about it, that's why I say giving back to the society during the town hall meeting. When those people representing us at the National Assembly, when they hold town hall meetings and explain to us the bills, these bills pass through the stage, did not pass through the stage as a result of this, as a result of that, it helps us, the public, to know if we will come together to even maybe amend the way the bill was presented to the National Assembly for us to know how to maybe alter or amend it so that we'll push it back once more into the to the National Assembly for it to know if it will survive. Because when our representatives, if they are giving us a feedback on bills and why the bills were rejected, because definitely when bills are rejected, reasons for the rejection will be made known to members of the House. It depends on the chambers. So if a feedback is given to the society through town hall meetings, the society will now know where to amend, things to add, things to remove, the alterations that are necessary that will help the bill pass through another reading. And if the bill is such an important bill that is really needed by the society, the people, the community would have, through the town hall meeting, known what to add, known what to alter or amend, and now push the bill back to the National Assembly for it to go through the reading once more. So I think the problem we are having here is the lack of communication between our representatives and members of the public. Because if such is done, definitely the cry of the common man will be heard more. Because when such bills are rejected, the representatives should, through a town hall meeting that might be held probably once every quarter, inform those that this bill that was pushed for so and so community or from so and so sector have been rejected as a result of this. So if there's a way they can amend it for that bill to be pushed back, it will definitely help the members of the public to know what is going on, and it will also help to give back to the society so that we really know what is going on at the National Assembly. But such is not the case in Nigeria.
Okay, let me ask, is there hierarchy in the legislature? Because sometimes you hear a ranking member, and what does this mean? What does this hold any benefit for the constituents if they have a ranking member?
And to a reasonable extent, you should be able to assist if you have a ranking member there. Because when they are doing the standing committees, when the bill is to be enacted into law, part of the people that will chair the committee will be the ranking members. So the ranking member will be able to really explain things to the committee, to help the committee to alter the bill, amend it in a way that will make it sail through the third reading for it to get to the assent stage. So definitely if you have a ranking member, the possibility of the ranking member chairing being the chairman of a standing committee will be higher than when you don't have a ranking member from your constituency.
All right. I would like to have your impression. What mechanism do you think could be put in place to ensure that bills are being followed through, they are being tracked, to ensure that they get to the right set of people? What mechanism can be put in place to follow it through? And then what do you think should be the role of the public when it comes to passage of bill? What role should they play? What part should they be actively involved based on your experience?
From my experience, I would say the mechanism that should be put in place is the media. The media has a role to play, because the media, I see the media as the channel or the go-between between the public and the ruling class, because the media are the ones that have access to the ruling class. So I believe that when such bills are being passed, it should be made public through the media. If a town hall meeting cannot be done, maybe as a result of, let me say, the size of the country or the community in question, I would say that the media should be allowed access when a bill that is meant to be for the public interest is being passed through the stages. So at this stage, the media should be allowed access into the chambers and to give us a feedback of what is going on, the bills that are being passed, whether the bills are passing through the stages or being rejected, the reasons why they are being rejected. If the members of the ruling class will not be able to meet with the public, then I think the best mechanism to be put in place is to make use of the media. because the media should be able to have access. Once they are able to identify themselves as a media or pressmen, they should definitely have access into these chambers, and they should be able to give us a feedback, if not a live coverage, but a feedback after the bills have been passed through different stages. It will help the public to know what is really going on at the legislative arm of the government.
I like the fact that
So I think the
you
hope of
talk.
the common man is the media. I just think the hope of the common man is the media, the president.
All right. I like the fact that you talked about the role of the media, which is exactly what we are doing now. For us at Souk News, that's part of our responsibility. I would like you to also talk about the role and the responsibility of organizations like the Nigerian Bar Association, which I think it's also critical. You're a member of that association and a high-ranking executive. I would like you to talk to us. What should be the role of organizations like NBA, Civil Rights Society, in ensuring that these bills are being tracked and followed through? Talking about the advocacy and which we earlier referred to.
The Nigerian Bar Association is like more like should be more like an action group that should come together to speak so that the ruling class will listen. I remember sometime in my own state, Ogun State, when Nigerian Bar Association, we had to stage a peaceful protest on the roads, the bad roads. And we invited the media, like I told you, the place of the media can never be overemphasized. Because even when the Nigerian Bar Association, when we are speaking, and the media is not helping us to propagate what we are saying, it will never go round, it will not get to the common man. So the Nigerian Bar Association is like an action group that should speak against the ills that they are seeing. Anything that they're seeing that is not good going on in the legislative house, anything that they are seeing that is not good that is going on in the public domain, the Nigerian Bar Association's duty is to speak out against it. Then the media helps us to propagate this, and it gets to the ruling class. And once it gets to the ruling class, I'm sure that whoever is in charge will definitely get back to us. Like I said, when we stage a protest in our state here, in Ogun State, against the bad roads in the community, in our area, those are local governments, we had to involve the media. And it was the media that made it to get to the attention of the governor, and the governor sent representatives to Nigerian Bar Association, assuring us that the roads will be done. So our own duty as Nigerian Bar Association is to speak out against any ills we are seeing happening. The media helps us propagate it, and I know that once it gets to the ruling class, and knowing that it's coming from the educated and learned people, definitely the ruling class will listen to us and go to action if it's done properly.
All right, on the final note, quickly, talk to us about the process of ratifying international treaties and agreements. Does the process differ from those of ordinary domestic bills in the Nigerian legislature?
All bills go through the same stages. The only thing it does is that the chambers now that will be involved, the two chambers will now be involved. If it's an international treaty, the chambers will have to form a committee that comprising of the two representatives of the two chambers. Unlike if it's just a bill that has to do with Nigeria, it can go through one of the chambers. After they ratify it, it goes to the next chamber. But when it's an international treaty, the two chambers, they have to come together to form a committee. Representatives of each chambers will come together and go through the bill, make sure that everything, through the same process, the first reading, second reading, all bills, whether in an international treaty or a local one, has to go through these stages for it to be ratified by the president.
All right, we're due for a break now.
Promo that this is what we are coming to.
I should wrap up here.
Sign her out, then promo the next. Sign her out, then promo the next.
on social media, many Nigerian young companies were celebrating, wow, we raised Series C, we raised Series D. And anytime they raised these monies, everybody hailed them. But what was behind it? What is behind every raise is that the entrepreneur founder is diluted significantly. We had a very interesting session, and in one of the sessions, there was a role play about the case study on CWG PLC, which is a company that I founded. And the case was written by Columbia Business School to discuss a point about venturing, about entrepreneurship, and about funding for the enterprise. And the case ended on a question: should Austin Okere take the venture capital investment, or should he reject it? Just a little bit of background. So this is a company, CWG, in 2005 that was doing very well. It was riding on the back of the Y2K that just happened at the turn of the century, was riding on the back of the telecom boom that happened immediately after the civilian government of BJ and GSM was launched, was riding on the back of the bank consolidation in 2005 that was done by Governor Soludo. And in each of these booms, CWG had positioned and taken good advantage. So this is not a company that was in dire need of cash or was desperate in 2005. But we had a plan to list our shares on the stock market, and we thought that the best way to do it was to first do either a private placement, or better still, to do a venture capital fundraise so that they will bring discipline into our operations, governance, strengthen our governance, and of course, bring more technical knowledge. And if people saw that this company was invested in you, probably it will make the listing on the stock exchange more attractive. The issue here is at what price? And I remember that I've discussed something similar on this on social media, where many Nigerian young companies were celebrating, wow, we raised Series C, we raised Series D. And anytime they raised these monies, everybody hailed them. But what was behind it? What is behind every raise is that the entrepreneur founder is diluted significantly. So if I use CWG as a case study, the case that was written by Columbia was that there was an offer of $8 million for 25% of the company, putting the valuation post at $32 million. Make no mistake, the Treasury bill's interest rate is 15% sometimes. Now, if someone is going to bring his money to invest in your company, he's looking for way more than that 15%, given that there's a high risk that his money will not come back. And the rule of thumb is that they're looking for 3 times what they brought in within 5 years. So in our case, they were going to be asking for $24 million within 5 years, or you list and give them a liquidity event or an exit. You have to check very well that this $8 million that you're taking in, you can do business in such a way that the value of the company can cough out $24 million in 5 years, regardless of exchange loss. Here is where it gets complicated. So you receive $8 million, which is converted to you in Naira. 2005 probably was about 130. Now, whether the Naira suffers devaluation or not, you're going to pay that $8 million. Now, paying $8 million, 5 years later, where the Naira is maybe 250 or 260, whilst you are generating your revenue in Naira, becomes almost impossible. And if the venture capital firm then has to take assets because you can't pay, he will end up owning, of course, a big chunk of your company, nothing at all. You begin to look like a management staff in the company you founded. So in our own case, we held out and we didn't take the money. And in 2009, when we took a subsequent one, the company was valued at $55 million, plus that there'd been an exchange loss. So the company was valued much more than the $32 million, and plus the fact that in Naira terms, they would have owned more of our company. My point being, don't sell your seed. Rather, till your seeds let it grow into a fruit, and sell at the fruit because the fruit is plentiful. A lot of our startups rush out to sell their seed and they sell it cheap. To complete that story, we actually then listed the company in 2013 for $90 million. Now, I did a rough calculation. If we were in dire need of money and we borrowed $8 million at an interest rate of 20%, at that time, Naira, we'll be returning Naira money, and we'll be returning something like, even if you take 100%, we'll be returning another $8 million in 5 years' time. But given that the company's valuation had gone to $55 million in that time, 2009, when the second PE company invested, we would have been better off taking the debt because we'll be returning an extra $8 million rather than 8 times 3, which is 24, that would have had to give $24 million that would have had to pay the VC company if we had taken the money at that time. So the delta is huge in terms of debt versus equity. So the point is, at some point in time, equity seems cheap, deceptively, but debt is cheaper. Especially at the early stages, what you have is a seed. You don't sell your seed. Have patience, hone it, bootstrap it, take debt to finance specific deals, makes you disciplined, and then when you have your fruit, you can then invite investors to come and you make more and you don't lose a huge percentage of your company. You actually do still own a huge percentage of your company. Be patient. Don't rush out to collect funds and celebrate it. You will have to pay back. Thank you.
Well, very brilliant talk there by Austin Okere talking about debt versus equity. And he emphatically said, do not sell your seed, be patient, sell at your fruit. And while that was going on, it also, someone said, was smiling. And it seemed like a lot that he said resonated with you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You know, many parts of third world would like to eat seed. And the way it's actually designed, it is the fruit that we're supposed to be eating. And so we are not patient to wait for the fruit. So we eat up the seed, and then we starve the following season. And I think that's a very wide concept from Austin Okere. We should be patient and allow the seeds to grow fruits before we can eat them.
Mm. Okay, let's go back to the focus of today, which is legislative process. Now, we've talked about the lawmaking procedures and stages. Let's get on now to the oversight function of the legislature. The oversight functions of the legislature are very many. They have the responsibility to monitor, review, and supervise the activities of the executive branch of the government. Now, while Idahosa Osamenze was talking to us earlier about the lawmaking procedures and then stages, he mentioned that there are many hands needed when Femi asked the question of having a harmonized house instead of having the upper and lower chamber. The upper chamber is the Senate, the lower chamber is the House of Representatives. So he mentioned that more hands are needed who would supervise these ministries, talking about the ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government. Now we're talking about oversight functions. Let's start with budgetary oversight of the legislature.
Well, like I said earlier in the first part, looking at the functions of the lawmaking, it's important that we realize that budget is a law. So that's why it's called an appropriation bill. And when it is passed, it becomes an act, a law of the federation. Now, once the legislature passes this bill, and of course, the president assents, it becomes a legal document. and it has to be monitored and supervised that it is executed both in letter and in spirit. Now, this is what oversight is all about. That responsibility had been given to the National Assembly, that the executive says in this fiscal year, we're going to spend XYZ amount of money to do ABC work. We want you to make it into a law. Now this law has been passed. It is the duty and the responsibility of the National Assembly to be sure that what is written down is what is being done in the MDAs. This is one of the most significant functions also of lawmaking in a federal arrangement.
All right. We understand now that the legislature have the oversight function, the responsibility to oversight budgetary appropriations. But the House sometimes, the National Assembly, have in some cases been accused of budget padding. Now, how can such a House supervise budgetary or supervise the budgets?
Well, I think what is being called budget padding, and I think of Nigerians that come to look at it and see it as if it's a corrupt practice, that somebody has put in money inside the budget. And I don't know what padding means. You see, what happened is that we have spoken to the fact that the lawmakers are representing their constituency in the National Assembly. And what is the whole reason for this is to be sure that every constituent part of Nigeria is considered in terms of lawmaking. Now, what happens there is that when the ministry and agency brings in their budget, every member in the National Assembly is asking, where is my constituency in this project? Because I'm representing the people. If you are, for example, you are going to do roads, XYZ, and you bring a budget to the National Assembly, and of course the committee sit down and look at your proposal and they say, look, you have not accommodated us. They say, oh, this is all we have and this is very important. And National Assembly members say, yes, we know it's important. My people do also want to see something. You see that you move money from here and put it here so that my own constituency will be accommodated. Now, this is all that is happening to ensure that the way the executive designed the bill, the appropriation bill, sometimes the National Assembly had to add their own constituency projects into the bill so that, of course, governors can reach where they come from. So this is what people regard as padding.
Talking about constituency projects, which you just make reference to, it's been controversial over the years because the procedures, we talked about procedures earlier, when it comes to constituency projects, you observe that constituency projects are being outrightly handled by these lawmakers where people are not likely, do not have a proper understanding of how it's being governed, how it's being released. Talk to us. What part of the oversight function should be extended to the issue of constituency projects to ensure that these projects, they leave the purpose for which they are intended?
Okay. You see, I will look at the constituency project this way. Unfortunately, we live in an environment where we see every elected officer as an executive who should be able to do a project. And how the electorate rates whoever represents them is on the basis of what they brought home. Do you get that picture clear? And this is why you see there's a struggle. And this didn't just start, it started during the Obasanjo regime, where of course they came to that conclusion that, look, if people are to vote for us, they will vote for us on the basis of what we have been able to do for them. So let us also have input into the budgeting process so that we can put something in the budget for our people. So that when we get back home, we'll be able to say, oh, we have represented you in government, and this is government presence in our constituency. So that is one issue. And it is their responsibility to ensure that if such projects are put into the budget, that it is executed. Not by them, but by the agency or the ministry involved. They are not the contractor. All they do is that they have put the project in the budget, and then, of course, people go to bid for that project. Whoever wins it, that's a different ball game. But when you look at the process, the way it's designed, it's just that you put a project for your community, and then the executive is actually the one to ensure that that project is executed if an appropriation is made for it.
I still want you to talk about, dwell more on this constituency project, because it's a big issue as far as Nigeria is concerned. You have people in that constituency who are like, I am not even aware of this project. You have money released for this project, and yet you discover that years down the line, the money is not being accounted for. How do we ensure that money released for projects are being accounted for, the procedures are being monitored? And then my emphasis is, what role should people of that constituency play to ensure that the lawmakers representing them are performing these oversight functions?
Well, I think, again, is to also look at the constituent where somebody represents. And this speaks to the complexity of the Nigerian political structure and systems. Now, if, for example, I am from Igwebe local government, and then I am from a village community in Igwebe local government, and I happen to be a member of the House of Rep, and I am going to represent like 3 local governments, for example, in my area. Now, those local governments that I represent in my area, I can't get a project for every one of them. So if I do one in my community, because of course I have to first of all prioritize myself and do one in my community, the people in the other community will be telling you that he has done nothing. So the ability to be able to do a project that will span through the entire constituent is always a challenge. But again, it's also to find out. Because it's one thing to put the thing on the budget. It's another thing to see that it was actually funded or financed. Up till recently, Nigeria used what they call the envelope system in terms of disbursement of appropriated fund. Money comes in, trickles into the consolidated revenue account. And what the Ministry of Finance is doing through the Accountant General of Federation to say, okay, your budget was 20 billion for this year. They give you a small envelope of 500 million. Now, if that project is completely valued by the contractor and they are giving to you and they give you 500 million, maybe 500 million will only be just for feasibility studies or probably preliminary work, which of course will not be seen by the people. So it does not always mean that when, of course, appropriations are made, that the actual sum is passed out. And I think the public also need to know this. We need to know, and this is where budgeting has actually done a lot in this regard. To go from constituency to constituency, to look at what project were in the appropriation, which projects were funded, and at what stage these projects are. So we, as the members of public, must be enlightened enough to know that, okay, there's a borehole that's assigned for my local government. That's one step. The second step is, has the fund been released to the contractor, or has even bidding been done for the borehole? So this is why you see, when you look at successive budget, you seem to see that projects are repeated. I remember one member of National Assembly some time ago was speaking to this issue, that I have looked at the budget. What was there in 2015, was there in 2016, was there in 2017. So to the ordinary person who is on the street, it will look as if that, look, people are just putting this project and using it to move money. But the reality on the ground is that when you also look at those years that he mentioned, you will see budget is performing at 30%, 35%, 45%, which means the project that were in the previous year budget has not been executed because they were not funded. And if they are critical projects, you can't just throw them away, so you have to bring them back into the budget. Now, if they are started and they have not been completed, because fund was not made available for it in the previous year, you have to carry it over to this year. So it will appear again in the appropriation. So it's not a form of duplication. It's just a fact that in the budgeting process, allocations are made based on projections. And the projections are what revenue that is coming to government in a particular year. And if the revenue does not come, government cannot spend. And if government has to spend without this revenue or have to borrow, of course, National Assembly also have to approve it. And for what purpose is this borrowing meant for? So these are the intricacies in the running of public service.
Okay, let's look at the investigative powers of the National Assembly. They have the authority to conduct investigation on matters of public interest, corruption, or mismanagement within the government. But scarcely do we find these investigations get to conclusion. Why is this happening?
Well, of course, you see, the legislature, for example, has the power to scrutinize how public money are spent. Now, you bring allegation to the National Assembly, and the National Assembly call the agency that are involved. Now, in the eye of the law, you know that somebody is presumed to be innocent until you are proven so. You see, when sometimes red flags are raised, or some people raise some issues concerning expenditure, probably they don't have the total picture of what is in there. And once such issues come to the National Assembly, you want to say, look, this is not right, this is not right, somebody is breaching some law. But when the agencies concerned bring in their documentation to the table, now, of course, you have to make a judgment whether there were infractions into the law of the land or not. Now, speculations will not amount to conviction, which is what Nigerians always look to. That so when you have an issue and you hear them say, "Oh, one man stole 80 billion," you are imagining that did he pull it out of the account and put it in his private account? Most of the time, those figures we hear are just maybe all the dynamics within the public service to move funds from one area to another area. So you have given us an envelope. We have given you your budget. How we spend our envelope is our own concern. So if you say, okay, you have given us 20 billion this year, and we have to use it for a specific area. So you come and say, oh, this was what you budgeted for this is what you budgeted for this is what you budgeted for it. Why was this money not spent here? Why was this money not spent here? But they also can tell you didn't give us all the money. So we have to prioritize what we need. Now, these are some of the real issues why you see that when this kind of investigative activities take place, you really don't get to conclusion. Don't also forget that the National Assembly had no power to adjudicate on issues. What really happened is that once they have finished their proceedings, they give it to the necessary agencies of government to go and do further investigation, the police, the DSS, whichever case, EFCC or ICPC, to go and do their own case. And when they finish, those ones are not going to just slam somebody in jail. They have to also send it to the courts to determine whether actually there was infractions on the law. This process takes a long period of time. It's not something that you have to just do overnight. Otherwise, there will be a miscarriage of justice. But because we want to say, oh, somebody stole money, and therefore the person must die today, that cannot happen in democracy. That cannot happen in a presidential arrangement where everybody has their own role or work to do with regard to how cases are determined.
But shouldn't there be a feedback mechanism? Because when matters of public interest arise and investigations are being conducted by committees of the National Assembly, the people expect that they be carried along in the process. What level of the investigation gotten into? Because the perception when there is no conclusion or there is no feedback, the assumption is that the matters have been swept under the carpets.
You see, but you see, this is a real issue, and this is what I'm speaking to. We're talking about being governed by the rule of law, where an offender, for example, is presumed to be innocent until you are proven it right. What use will it be to go and put investigation in the court of public opinion? It becomes subjudized. So these are the issues that we must also understand, that there's a procedure and a process for investigation. So you won't come and say, oh, we had a sitting, we met with this person in charge, this is what he tells us, and we are taking him to court. I don't think that is the kind of communication that we should expect. And Nigerians too, we also have responsibility. And that is why the Freedom of Information Act is there. That if you are an interested party, you can actually also go to the National Assembly and say, I'm interested in this case, I want to know what has happened. And of course, the law permits you really, if it is not a matter that is under the jurisdiction of the court, they can release some of those information to you if they are not classified.
Let's look at the challenges being faced by lawmakers when it comes to oversight function. I wish you were a lawmaker, but you've been providing justice to the topic, so I can put this to you. So let's look at the challenges being faced by lawmakers as far as this climb is concerned. You observe that they've been constitutionally licensed or obliged to carry out these oversight functions, but they are likely going to face some challenges by the time they're dealing with people, contractors, and all that. Talk to us. What do you think should be done to make the job of oversight function for lawmakers easier, transparent, and they can easily carry that? Let's talk about the challenges, and then how do we mitigate this problems?
I think the biggest challenge that they have is also a challenge of perception. I've been training civil servants, public officers for quite some time now, for over 2 decades. And every time you meet with civil servants and they feel that the biggest problem they have in not doing well is the National Assembly. Because they see the National Assembly as obstacle to their work. But you see, the way I have seen it, having interrogated at both levels, with the member of the National Assembly and also with the members of the civil service, my own personal conclusion is just like an average Nigerian who drives on the road, who accuses the police for collecting bribe, but is driving with a vehicle whose papers are expired or without driver's license. This is the way I see the situation. Because if you're going to equity, your hands must be clean. Now, civil service, if you have written an appropriation which is originated by you, then you are duty bound to execute it to the letter without infraction. Now, you want flexibility in terms of implementation, which you have not built into the act. That makes you vulnerable. It makes you difficult to face the National Assembly. You put a project on your appropriation. Now you have the duty to defend it and make a business case for that project. That we need it as a nation. It's not just that you see every bill, that every project that you brought before the National Assembly, they you just take it as good. You have to make a business case for it. And this is the real reason why we have the National Assembly, whose duty is to ensure that the public fund is spent for public good. Now, if you're bringing things into the budget, you want them not to be scrutinized, then you are going to face trouble with the National Assembly. So I feel in my own case, which of course maybe somebody will be speaking to later, is how we engage various stakeholders in navigating through this process. You know who your committee chairman is, a member of your committee, and then you should be able to carry them along in the design of your appropriation such that everybody is on the same page, and you won't have you won't have problem passing your appropriation, and you will not have problem in terms of execution, because all of us are on the same page. Whether we have 3 different arms of government, the real whole idea is not to create a confusion, is not to create equivalencies. The whole idea is to ensure that we are doing things transparently, openly, responsibly, and accountably to the people that we represent. And I think both sides of the divide, the executive and the legislature, must look for those ways to collaborate and harmonize operations so that we have a seamless process in administrative fund and resources of the state.
All right, that's great. On the final, let's talk about data and documentation. It is one thing to carry out oversight function. It is another thing to document the process, the findings, and the recommendations. Talk to us what should be done to ensure that the proper documentation and reporting as regards oversight functions are being done, are passed adequately to the right quarters, and then proper implementations are being done.
I think that's one issue that, of course, the Bola Tinubu regime must deal with seriously, because the issue of data is very important, is critical to the national development and survival. Now, why do I say this? I was happy when, of course, the Oracle people were received in the Aso Rock, and I saw it as the beginning of good things to come. What we simply need to do is to digitize the process of governance in Nigeria, so that on the dashboard, the president, the Senate president, committee chairman can see what is coming in and what is going out. In that case, there will be no fight, there will be no quarrel. Simply make it an e-government, let everything be digitized, let people be able to see. We will see more transparency, more openness in government business. Then, of course, we'll be able to build trust in the system and then transition into greatness.
Okay, finally, before we end the discussion on oversight functions, in performance audits, what should be the process to ensure that there is transparency and it is regularly done? It is not when something happens with a particular ministry, then that becomes like a wake-up call for the National Assembly.
Well, I think the real issues in terms of performance is not going to be a simple thing, except that you want the lawmakers to be resuming in each of the agencies and ministry. And of course, we have the Auditor General of Federation who should be able to look at the books and then, of course, report back to the National Assembly and say, these are the things that we see. So it will be very difficult for the National Assembly members, except that something is brought to their notice, that then they have to follow through. Otherwise, you have to have a member of the National Assembly in each agency and ministry to be seeing what is going on everyday basis. But speaking to performance, and I think one of the issues that we must also address very critically is that those who are setting objectives for themselves on the things that they want to achieve must stick to the objectives and think it through before bringing it into the public space.
Thank you very much. What a way to wrap up this discussion. I hope you are planning to be a lawmaker very soon. That's great. So we've been speaking with Idauza, who has been doing justice to oversight function of lawmakers in Nigeria. Don't worry, the conversation is getting bigger, it's getting better, and it's getting more robust. We'll go on a short break now, and when we return, we'll still have more conversation. Stay with us.
All right, if you just tuned in, we're still talking about legislative process in Nigeria. So we've talked about the lawmaking procedures and stages. We've also looked at the oversight functions of the legislature. Now let's talk about how to ensure transparency and accountability, because without these two elements, it will not be a complete job. How do you ensure that the lawmaking processes are transparent and fair to all? And how do you also ensure, how does the country ensure that the lawmakers themselves are alive to their oversight functions? So this is what we'll be looking at right now. Sam Oroju, who is Director, Research, Policy and Development, Femi Watch Limited, owners of Sook News and Watch Radio, is in the studio this morning to do justice to this issue. Just like Idausa Osama did justice to the issue of oversight functions of the legislature. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Blessing. Thank
Welcome
you for having me. Good morning,
Glad
Femi.
to have you here.
My pleasure.
All right, and when we talk about having transparency and accountability, let's begin with transparency of the legislature. Now, when I talked about the investigative powers of the legislature, now a part of it that was a concern is the aspect of feedback. In some of the things, or in the line of duty of the legislature, how can they ensure that the processes are transparent? There is no reason for anyone to doubt that there wasn't fairness.
All right, thank you very much indeed. I think the concept of democracy revolves around what you call open governance. So transparency and accountability is central to lawmaking process. So the point that is key in terms of how the public see the National Assembly is that more often than not, some of the things they do are not open to the public. Therefore, the publics are demanding that whatever process that is put in place in terms of lawmaking must be open so that people are carried along in terms of what they do at the National Assembly. So transparency is key in terms of what you do in the lawmaking process.
Let's talk about what you made reference to, people asking questions and then talking about transparency as far as lawmakers are concerned. One area that it's critical and questions are being raised is the area of asset declarations, the activities about the National Assembly, how much an average lawmaker in Nigeria earns. Talk to us. What mechanism could be put in place to ensure that transparency is being done when it comes to budgeting as far as National Assembly is concerned, allowances being collected by an average lawmaker? There is this assumption there that an average lawmaker in Nigeria is making more money than every other lawmaker in the whole world is being paid. You don't even know how much an average lawmaker in Nigeria earns. How do we ensure that transparency is put in place so that there won't be misconception and there will be proper understanding about the activities, the budgeting, and the allowances as far as lawmakers are concerned in Nigeria? Okay,
thank you very much indeed. I think there's a lot of perception in terms of the roles of the legislator in Nigeria. When you talk about the earning, people always make a mistake, and the earlier speaker alluded to some of those facts earlier. When people think that the budget of the National Assembly just belong to the legislator, there are other public servants who work within those space. So people need to understand that beyond the budgeting that they know about, there are other civil servants that earn part of those money. Therefore, the National Assembly in itself has a responsibility to update the public through some mechanism in terms of their spokesperson able to bring information to the public. The activities are known from time to time so that this perception of what they earn can be put to rest. But what is key, on the other hand, is that when we borrow our democracy from particularly the United States of America, that's what you have. You have what you call the Public Engagement Office that has an interface between the public and the lawmaker. So you're able to bounce information through these processes. Maybe when we speak to other factors later, we'll be able to elucidate more on that. Then there's been a clamor for the office of the citizen Nigerians have been clamoring, particularly civil society organizations, in the last 3-4 years that an office of the citizen should be created where citizens can galvanize their position and be able to engage with the executive, the legislator in a friendly manner and be able to get information so that the perception can be okay.
Now, talking about having access to information, we do know that the Freedom of Information Bill was passed, but how much of that are we seeing in reality, the access, the ease to information?
The access is there because the law that is enabling that is there, but one of the challenges we will have as a people is that we like to speak to certain issues, but we do not activate some of those provisions, those framework that we have, even as citizens, so that we can even test the law. So the message here is that citizens must equally find a way to get those assets, those information, and budget it, like Idausa mentioned earlier, has been going from one constituency to the other, looking at some of these projects, and they're able to report this project real time, and people are able to give information so that dividend of democracies are sustained over a period of time. So the relationship has to be, citizen has to be more demanding, and they should access those information because the law enables that. When those informations are not, they can test that by going to court.
Okay, still on this issue of Freedom of Information Act, which over time has been tested, what do you think should be done to improve the public awareness in regards to Freedom of Information Act? Because in recent times, you observe that this act has only been tested by lawyers who see it as their primary responsibility. You're talking about citizens asking questions, public engagement. How do we ensure that there's this public awareness as regards the provision, the importance of an act like Freedom of Act, which also give an opportunity for every person in Nigeria to ask questions as regards transparency and accountability as far as lawmaking is concerned?
I think is civic education. So what is critical, the National Orientation Agency must be up to its responsibility by putting this in the public space. So we need more education so that citizens are empowered to place a demand on legislators and they're able to get feedback mechanism in such a way that the dividend of democracy are sustained.
Okay, when we talk about citizens of Nigeria having free access to information, now how does the legislature balance that with the need to also protect certain information that maybe pertains to national security?
No, issues of national security.
For instance, are they bound to make every information that comes under their scrutiny or every matter that comes under their scrutiny available to the public? How do they achieve the balance between providing access to information, in being transparent, and in creating that confidentiality of certain information? Or should it just be exposed to all Nigerians as far as every dealing of the National Assembly is concerned?
No, I think the Freedom of Information Act speaks to what is confidential in nature and what the public can access. So I think that's not a critical issue. There are things that are of national interest that are confidential. Those issues are critical. But the general information in terms of access to information are there for the public to access. I think for me, that's not a major concern. Once there are issues of national interest, those are within the domain of those who are sworn to the oath of secrecy to keep. But what it is, for general information, you can access those information as at when due.
Okay, so if that is the case, then why don't we have a system like when you go to certain government ministries, you find some information about them. Why can't we have like a portal about the on the National Assembly where instead of doing the paperwork or you go over to the National Assembly, you're demanding certain documents, maybe on some bills, on the processes, on recommendations or some things, it is just there for you to access on the internet, because this is the time of technology. It's a digital world.
I think if you go to the dashboard of the National Assembly, you have on the landing page, you have where you can access to bills, the lawmaking process, the bills that have been passed, those ones that have been recommended to committees for further scrutiny. They are there on the dashboard. So people need to check those things out, and that those informations are valuable when you do request them. And you equally have department, a public affairs department within the National Assembly, where you can go to look for information where the need arise. So those information are there as we speak. So citizens must be more engaging in terms of what they want and how they want to get those information. Those informations are in the public space, in my view.
We had a conversation earlier with Idauza where we talked about constituency projects. I would like you to speak to the issue of constituency projects. How well has an average lawmaker in Nigeria been transparent when it comes to the issue of constituency projects? Have you seen any form of transparency in the recent years, any form of accountability when it comes to constituency projects? Because these are gray areas, these are critical areas that will resonate with an average person in that constituency.
Well, personally, when it comes to constituency projects, in my personal view, there's been a debate along those areas whether lawmakers should be involved in executing project for constituency. That's a subject for another day. But what is key, because of our own peculiarity, people always find a way to put projects that are in the interest of their community. Therefore, it's only communities that where those projects are cited may be able to speak critically to some of those issues. But then the debate has been there since Obasanjo, and I'm thinking that some of those things are getting better in terms of the information. You have civil society organizations that are tracking those projects. Therefore, I think most of the legislators are now up in their game in trying to see how those projects come to their fruition, because they're under public scrutiny. So those projects have come to stay. There are a lot of monitoring mechanisms that are put in place by NGOs and civil society to monitor those projects. So far, what budget it has done in the last 5 years, it has bring to fore some of those projects. Some have been completed 60, 70, 80%, as the case might be, if you read their report. To that extent, we can say that there are impacts from those constituency projects.
There's this perception in this climate, especially in developing countries, about lawmakers not being open when it comes to transparency. I call it perception because sometimes perception seems to be stronger than the reality. It's a perception that an average lawmaker is hiding something, or wants to hide something, or wants to doctor the figure. How do we begin to correct this narrative to ensure that an average lawmaker is even willing? Because it's one thing for the citizen to demand, and it's another thing for the lawmaker to be willing to be open and transparent and say, okay, this is how far we've gone, this is how far we've done as regards this project, this is where we were, this is where we are now. How do we begin to correct this narrative to ensure that we have good governance and then we have a better society?
I think there's, I don't know whether it's a constitutional provision, I'm not too sure, but I think there's a place for a constituency office. That office was supposed to be a meeting point between legislators and their constituents. But to a very large extent, those offices just exist in some of those constituencies. So I would suggest to lawmakers to be more engaging through their constituency office, so that this misconception and perception about their role and the process of lawmaking become more open to the public, so they engage more meaningfully. So therefore, those constituency offices must have officers where people can have contact with their legislators, and they're able to get feedback of how people feel about them from their various constituencies. But the beauty of it is that every 4 years, if you don't deliver value to your constituency, you're not likely to return. Therefore, it's their responsibility to be upbeat in terms of the way they manage themselves and the information and the deliverables that they bring to their constituents.
In holding the legislature accountable, what should be the metrics for assessing stewardship? Because when Femi was talking about the constituency project that we sometimes see some of the members execute in their constituency, that seemed to be the only metrics by which their constituents judge their performance. So if there are no physical projects executed, it seemed like this legislative member has underperformed. So what should be the metrics?
No, I think what is important, the constituency project is there. Those are the physical assets that a constituent can see. In addition to that, what are your roles in plenary? What number of bills were you able to bring to fruition? These are other key metrics. But in our client, people always look at what they can see physically. But the process of engaging in terms of a law-making process that will engage the society and make society better are critical roles that make us look at the importance of the legislative process.
All right. Do you think it's important for us to start looking at legal framework policies that will compel public officers to be transparent, or politicians or lawmakers to be transparent? I know there are some, but the challenge is not the absence of law or regulation, but the implementation of this. How do we apply this to an organ of government like the legislature, and how do you think we can make use of the available legal work, available policies to compel lawmakers to be open, to be transparent and accountable?
Thank you very much indeed. I think for me, what is key here is that I spoke about the office of the citizen. The citizen need to enable more to be able to put lawmakers into account. So therefore, you demand more from lawmakers and public officers. The laws, the regulatory framework and the legal frameworks are there. But what is important is citizens that can make open democracy work. So the citizens should place more demand on their legislator or public officers. So when these demands are there, they become more open, more transparent, and become more accountable. So the office of the citizen must be strengthened, and the constitutional provision should be made in the next amendment that will be made, so that we have an office of the citizen that makes everybody to be accountable.
Okay, good one. You talked about the office of the citizen. But you know, we have three arms of government. You have the executive, you have the judiciary. Now, these two arms, executive and judiciary, since we're looking at the legislative arm, what role do you expect of the executive and the judiciary arm to play in ensuring that this transparency becomes the order of the day? Because these organs, they are meant to checkmate each other or one another. So what should be the role of the executive or the president, of the governor? What should be the role of the judiciary, judges, lawyers, to ensure that transparency and accountability have been upheld when it comes to the activities of lawmakers?
I think simply put is the rule of law. The executive must emphasize the rule of law. And once the rule of law is emphasized, then people become more accountable. So once there are infraction into any of the regulatory framework that has been put in place, people should be punished adequately so that it serves as a deterrent to other people. So rule of law is very critical to open governance, accountability, transparency.
Okay, this office of the citizen that you've talked about, how is it going to come? In what form? Do we now have to, are we going to have a system where some members of the public will be made as representatives of the general public to engage the legislative members? Essentially,
that's what I'm talking about. Participatory democracy. Citizens will be able to galvanize their opinion in terms of lawmaking process. They are able to bring the legislator to account. So that office of the citizen will be an aggregate where people can raise their voices against what is not right in the lawmaking process beyond the public debate that you have. People can galvanize their interests, they build a consensus, and they are able to pass that to government to checkmate. So it's like an ombudsman who checks on those who are in government. That's the office
Would
of the
this
citizen.
not increase the cost of governance? Because if you have people who, I don't know if that's going to be full-time, whether full-time or part-time, some form of remuneration will go with this office. So would that not amount to an increasing cost of governance? And what is the role of civil society organizations if we then need a citizen's office?
All right, citizen office is just a place where various voices from civil society, non-governmental organizations, other private sector people that want to push a particular agenda can formalize the process so that we help in terms of making people to be accountable. On the other hand, people are not going to be paid money from the office of the citizen. So it's going to be a kind of a contributory way to put governance in check. And other people within the civil society will get funding to be able to push those agenda. And that is being done, but in clusters. But we need to put that office in place so that the voice of citizens can be heard through the process of lawmaking.
You seem to be emphasizing on this office of public citizen and all that, which I feel is also good. Because an average lawmaker comes from a particular town, from a particular local government. And that brings in this question. How do we co-opt traditional rulers, you know, those who hold custody of constitution or local constitution, traditional constitutions? How do we bring in local government chairmen? How do we bring in those who are in that constituency to localize, you know, this process, to own it and ensure that they hold their officers accountable? Because you discover there's this sentiment, it's from our place, let's leave him. It's our turn, oh, Emilokon, and things like that, let's leave him. So how do we change this narrative where an average person sees himself as someone who needs to ask questions rather than being part of the cake?
It's just essentially community engagement processes. These community engagement processes from local government areas to state and to the federal level. We feed into the office of the citizen and we're able to hold people to account. So it's going to be a seamless process. Other actors within the community will find a way to raise their voices and try to put these voices and send those voices to a place where people can activate those voices and be able to put people to account.
All right, now for public engagement to happen effectively, the people must know what to engage on, at what level they should engage. So that brings us to civic education. Now, how should civic education be done in a manner that even those in the rural areas are aware of the roles of the legislature, they are aware of their rights, they know the areas to demand accountability on, and perhaps the mechanism through which they can demand accountability? Good, we have civic education as a subject taught in schools. Should it end there?
So we have duties and obligations as citizens as well. So those duties and obligations must be taught beyond schools. Community centers must have information on what constitutes good governance so that they're able to help to pursue the agenda in terms of agenda setting, which participatory democracy, or what we call public engagement, speaks about.
I would like you to do an assessment of what public engagement is as far as our environment is concerned. How far have we gone when it comes to public engagement? Because we're in an environment where an average person is clamoring for survival. And now you're asking for public engagement. Some will feel it's not my priority, it's not my scale of preference. So how do we begin to ensure that public engagement is a daily thing, it's a constant thing, and civic education being something that has to be prioritized in our climate?
The media is already playing that role on the one hand. On the other hand, when you talk about public engagement, you're just talking about how citizens can be involved in the process of law making, in the process of putting the executive arm of government into account. So media is doing that on the one hand, civil society is doing that already. So what I'm talking about is when you create the office of the citizen or office of public engagement like you have in the United States of America, people are able to galvanize their voices, their issues, and be able to put it and act in a way that they can sustain the process of lawmaking and their voices, their decision-making process, public policy process, the citizens are carried along in that process. So it's ongoing, but we need just to scale it up in order to have more meaningful engagement with the lawmaking process. Those at the executive level, I call it bring to account in terms of what they do generally.
Let me come in this light. How do we deploy the concept of civic education? Of course, it's more like, people see like a course in the university. Well, how do we deploy that to correcting some vices in the society, some negative practices like corruption, conflicts, bribery and all that? How do we deploy the concept of civic education to correcting all these negative practices in the society?
Yeah, I think those concepts in terms of conflict resolution, conflict management, anti-corruptions, they are already infused into civic education, particularly with the National Orientation Agency that is saddled with the responsibility of orientating the public in what the government does. But I think the challenge is that the citizens are not really well informed. So we need more education to push this agenda forward so that more people will have more information on their roles and responsibility on the one hand, because citizens themselves have roles and responsibility, while the government has their own roles and responsibilities. So citizens must pay their taxes, respect the rule of law, so that it becomes more mutually beneficial. When the government play their own roles, citizens must equally play their roles as well.
Okay, we know that sometimes apathy is developed towards civic education. Not that some citizens are not aware of their duties. They are. But apathy has been formed towards it, perhaps because of the perceived negligence of government towards their own responsibilities. So what strategy can be employed to correct this so that the people are motivated to apply what they've learned about their civic duties, and then they go on to do it?
The citizens themselves must be responsible as well. So the people that are in government, first and foremost, one of the process of participatory democracy is that citizens brought those people to bear through the process of election. So citizens get the leader that they equally bring forward. So what is important is that citizens should be more discerning in how they choose their leader. So the leadership recruitment process, citizens must be discerning in how they recruit people into that space. So once you recruit proper people that has all the core competence of governance, capacity, compassion, once those things are in place, then we have a harmonious relationship between
Okay, then
citizens
how do we translate civic education to active civic participation? Because sometimes the engagement is left for civil society organizations alone, while the other citizens just stand aloof.
No, I think the citizens are equally part of the civil society.
I said the
as well,
other
yes.
citizens stand aloof.
No, I don't think they stand aloof. They are equally engaging. But the level of engagement is what will scale up. Citizens are engaged. They discuss who should be their leader. They
discuss among themselves or with do they engage the public servants as much as they should with the knowledge that they have received from civic education?
I think they do, but what we should be speaking about is how do we upscale those engagements. Those engagements are there. That's why you have people writing petition to the EFCC, making complaint that Route A has not been put up properly. So those engagements are there. But maybe we should upscale those engagements so that citizens are more involved in the process, so that that harmonious relationship that we're talking about can be sustained over a period of time.
What's a way to wrap up the discussion so that citizen engagement can be done over time? Sam, thank you very much for your submissions. You've been very helpful in this discussion, and always a pleasure having you.
My pleasure.
Blessing.
Oh yes, I think this is a call to action, not just for those in the legislative chamber, talking about the Senate or the House of Representatives. It is also for citizens to know they do have a duty. First, you know your civic duties. You pay your tax, You have the right to vote and be voted for. But when it comes to voting, we know that some voters have developed apathy. But how can you complain about a system you did not participate in? So those things must change. And we must make it a collective action to demand accountability. Because it's like you're employing a worker and you do not assess the performance of that worker. That is what accountability does. So if we have people in the legislature together, we must ensure that they are alive to their responsibilities for us to have the benefit of it and have a widespread development. That's been the show today. Thank you very much for watching. I am Blessing AH. Tomorrow will be another time, 7 a.m. West African time. Do not forget that 10 a.m. is for Business Insight with Olaoluwa Awe Femi.
And I am Femi Ayodele. Think of what you can do to make your environment, your society, and the continent better. And for me, it's always a pleasure. I will return to have more of this conversation. Thank you for being with us.